think if I heard you all correctly, the chairman and the gentleman from New Jersey, I think the point you're trying to make is that when you made requests, when you were in the minority, you should have gotten productions from the government. In other words, the minority has rights to seek and compel production of documents without the assistance of the majority. I certainly hope that's the case. We're in the minority now, and I would love to have the ability to do that, so we can discuss whether that's what you actually meant or not later on. But and I did want to address a couple of things too. I certainly share the view about the threats against the Supreme Court justices, the protests against them. To the extent violent threats were made, those people should be prosecuted. My recollection, without I could be corrected, but I thought one of the individuals, the one who had made threats, had been arrested as in the middle of being prosecuted now. I believe in federal court, so I think that's exactly what the Justice Department's supposed to be doing. And I would note too, to the extent we're talking about threats to public officials, and we can make these documents available, but school board members in Loudoun County and across the country have been subjected to these kinds of threats, death threats. We've got some up behind us. I'll submit a couple more for the record. One was a school board member, actually from Florida, I believe, who wrote about it, and the school board member, she mentioned that they burned FU in her yard, that they were coming for you. We're going to make you beg for mercy. If you thought January 6th was bad, wait until you see what we have for you. I'll submit that for the record. The threats against the Georgia Secretary of State, Mr. Raffensperger, who is still getting threats, by the way, for taking the courageous stand to refuse to submit to Donald Trump's demands that he lie about the election returns in Georgia. He's getting death threats for that. And we don't have to go all the way down to Georgia either, because they're getting death threats in Loudoun County too. As a matter of fact, they sort of peaked. They jumped at the time of the January 6th event, and then they came back up in the following summer, which is, I guess, what the point of these subpoenas are about, because that was some of the time when the rhetoric ramped up. Oh, here's the chart right here. So you see the big jump coming there in November, December of 2020 into January 21. That was the raid on the Capitol. The dotted line is the total numbers. The blue line, which you can see peaks around there in October, November of 2021, that comes during the time when Republicans started making efforts to go after school boards. And the Proud Boys have got an article we can submit for the record on that. And we've got an audio tape. I don't have time to play it now, but from a group in Virginia that explains they targeted the Loudoun Public County School Board in an effort to ramp up opposition to certain policies that they disagree with. And roughly at the same time that they were ramping this up, as you can see there in the graph, the threats jumped up against these officials.
Without objection, the article from the Washington Post and the article, what was that, CNN, are entered into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I did want to close with this. The gentleman from New Jersey said he didn't know more now than he did before the hearing. I'll say this. The party submitted over 1,000 pages, like almost 1,500 pages of documents, and they go directly to the issues that were requested by the subpoena. And to the extent there's some kind of subtle accusation about an attempt for the Department of Justice to go after parents, I would just draw a contrast between the Attorney General's document, October 4, which goes to this issue. And basically, he said, I want you all to convene meetings, U.S. attorneys, federal officials, meet with local officials and have meetings. Ask them if they think there's a problem. If you go to the document production, you can see on DOJ HJC 155 that the head of EOUSA, in following up on that, sent instructions out telling people, quote, convene a meeting by November 3, 2021. And then if you go back further, in the documents that have already been produced to the committee, so we have these in our possession right now. So if you go to DOJ HJC 144, this is from the feedback they get. And it says, we received feedback after a meeting from the chief of Richmond PD, and the meeting was the Western District of Virginia. So it wasn't the whole state, but that's how the U.S. attorneys divvy it up in Virginia. There's the Eastern District and a Western District. So the chief of the Richmond PD says that he's assigned uniform officers to attend Richmond school board meetings, which has been well received by the school board president despite initial hesitance. With the officers present, meeting attendees were able to calm down and the board conducted its business effectively. And then with respect to the issue of weaponization, I would draw the contrast between the memo from the Attorney General, and I know I got 1 extra minute like my colleague had there. And I would ask you to draw the contrast between the Attorney General's memo with respect to these school boards and the one that goes out with respect to the attacks on airplane flights. I think that was one on the graph there too, where that jumped after people got upset about the mask and they started losing their minds and getting violent on planes. In that memo, the Attorney General says, I am directing United States attorneys to prioritize prosecution of federal crimes occurring on commercial aircraft that endanger the safety of passengers, flight crews, and flight attendants. Now, when the Attorney General wants them to prosecute, he said it. And the one with respect to the school board, all he says was convene meetings, and based on what we've seen in the documents that have been produced so far, that's all they've done. No attempts to go after parents, no threats, even though threats have been made against school board members, nothing of the sort. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I think he's done a good job of pointing out that we have different crimes, one of which is federal, one of which is primarily handled at the local level, and is better handled at the local level. But the gentleman